Yeah, you've touched on a thing that's fairly controversial in the field, which is called treatment for prevention. Unfortunately, that is not economic compared to other interventions. That is, most people who have AIDS, over 90% in Africa, do not know they have AIDS. And so they're not seeking treatment. In fact, they're not willing to even go get a test. And so unless you're willing to put coercive means in place to force people to be tested, then you're not going to get a high enough enrollment to have treatment for prevention make a difference. But we have models, and there's tons of people who get to weigh in on these things. We put our AIDS strategy out. We present it. Why are we spending this much on male circumcision, this much on new drug treatments, this much on prophylaxis, this much on vaccines? And we get a lot of good feedback. We have an expert panel. We have people who can look at it. Every grant we do, of course, is completely public, and we write down the criteria and the goals we have for that grant, just basically the internal system that we use. And then we score the grants in the 3 to 5 year time frame, however long that grant is. We have a lot of failed grants. Some failed because we were dumb when we wrote the grant. Some failed because we essentially dug a dry hole. That is, everybody did hard work, but that particular drug didn't work. And in the AIDS field, the amount of analytic thinking about optimizing treatment costs per year, it's been weaker than it needs to be. And that's partly because they didn't expect the funding to be plateaued. They actually thought funding would keep going up. Best case, the dream is that we get flat funding. And so we have to get way more efficient, because unfortunately AIDS is the hardest of them all. You have to treat people lifelong. With malaria, TB, vaccines, once you've got your 3 shots, you're golden for the rest of your life. So you don't have that yearly cost. So AIDS is the hardest area we work in terms of the financial choices and the financial costs.
Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Melina Platas. I'm a graduate student in political science. My question is related to your foundation's kind of how you're thinking about social science research. So a lot of what you've mentioned here are technical solutions, and thinking about how the natural sciences, how innovations in terms of medical technology can solve some of these major problems we have. But you also mentioned that lack of access, infrastructure, and understanding, people's knowledge of health, for example, affects the uptake of a lot of these technologies. So I'm wondering how things like behavioral economics, political science, health policy, how those feature in your long-term strategy at the foundation, how you think about incorporating those into your work.
Yeah, those are super important things. And just even when you have a new vaccine, sometimes you don't get much demand for it. And it's sometimes very hard to get country adoption. India hasn't adopted a new vaccine for a long time, and we finally, a few years ago, made a breakthrough on that. A lot of our interventions relate to women. That is, if you're pregnant, you need to be counseled about certain things. In many countries, you're encouraged to go to a facility where they can take care of you to give birth. Even if you're using a traditional birth attendant, there's certain things about how you keep the baby warm. There's certain symptoms that you should seek care. And so one of the greatest areas of social science we're involved in is creating women's groups around the world. It's been a very successful tactic in parts of Africa. It's been very successful in parts of India, and we're constantly trying to scale that up. These groups both spread knowledge in a very efficient way, and they give a voice to the women in terms of are the resources really being properly allocated? Is the nurse showing up, or the drugs being stocked? It's really social scientists working with the medical doctors. So we're funding field pilots for a lot of these things. It's been interesting with ARVs. ARVs have a reputation that when you start to go on AIDS drugs, you actually get sicker. And there is some truth to that. And so now we're thinking, okay, how can we get people to understand it's good in the long run? Very tough problem. Behavior change most efforts to cause significant behavior change relative to AIDS did not work, and we spent a lot of money on that. So absolutely these things are a mixture of the great tool and the social behavior. Part of the reason we're making so much progress on malaria is that people in a community know that if they don't use a bed net, then it can cause their neighbor to get malaria. And so there's good community enforcement. When we go into a community and insist on what's called total sanitation, that there's no outdoor defecation, you've got to get, that's all social science. There's no technology in that one at all, except a shovel to dig a hole. But that one has been successful in some settings and not successful in other settings. So we have a lot of social scientists, and many of the innovations are coming from them.
Over here. My question is, I was wondering if you could extrapolate a little bit on the role of the internet as a development tool. You look a lot of times it can be used as a great tool to unite people in donor countries, and then a lot of times the Peace Corps volunteers spend most of their time bringing the internet to various places in the developing world. So what do you think is the most effective way to use the internet as a tool for sustainable development?
Yeah, the internet is not present in most locations where poor people are present. And there is no internet there. There is voice phone calls in about 30% of the areas where the poorest live, and in about 10% you have text messaging. Now those numbers will go up over time, and that's a very hopeful thing, because when we look at giving people health reminders, or we look at a farmer knowing information they ought to know, or even just taking a nice photo of their diseased plant and getting advice on it, the idea that we'll have that digital infrastructure over time can revolutionize things. And so what we're doing often is we're taking lower middle income countries and piloting cell phone driven activities, knowing that we can't yet do it in our primary target areas, but that time is on our side. We've worked closely with the mobile companies on these digital money projects, on these health access projects. We have, in some cases, like in Ghana, this thing called Motec, where we actually do go in and create cell phone coverage, encourage the wireless guy to put cell phone coverage into the primary health center. So we're registering all the births, we're keeping track of things, we're doing supply chain through the cell phone there. So it's a promising thing, mostly the mobile network, not the classic internet that we might think of. But of course, you're absolutely right. The internet is a wonderful tool in terms of the scientists working on these problems together to raise awareness of these problems. After all, if you walked off the Stanford campus and there were people dying of malaria, you'd probably get them a bed net. The fact that they live far away is the big problem. It's that the rich people are all clustered together, and so our sense of humanity doesn't operate because it's so out of sight. And the internet is a tool that can reduce that distance, have us feel a common sense both of the problem and of the success. I don't want it just to be this, hey, we've got some sob stories on the internet, could you click on our URL and feel bad? That's not going to create the right thing. Oh, in fact, that was actually one thing I was supposed to mention. I don't know why I didn't. We actually have a $100,000 prize award that we're going to give out to about 10 people who come up with the best ideas for talking about why foreign aid is valuable, and doing it in a way that's kind of appealing. We really feel like our messaging has been weak. We feel like we've been lazy about it because we kind of expected that aid wouldn't get cut. Anyway, so it's you should go up to the website and see if you have ideas about communication. We're dying to get them.